Hey guys, I'm Heidi Preeb. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. Today on this channel, we're going to be talking about how to work with anxious preoccupation responses. So basically, moments where your attachment system is super activated and it feels like you are not going to be okay until you can get the attention of and co-regulation from one of your attachment figures. And of course, it does not necessarily mean that you are triggered or insecurely attached if you want the attention of and co-regulation from the people that you love. That is a very normal part of being alive. But when we have anxious leaning attachment systems, so that means either anxious preoccupied or fearful avoidant, we can sometimes get stuck in certain patterns of reacting and trying to get our needs met in certain ways that are not right for the situation at hand. And so, what earning secure attachment is about is expanding the repertoire of skills that we have available to us so that we're no longer finding ourselves stuck reacting the same old way to every situation when there are a whole arsenal of skills that might help us more. And so, that's what we're going to be focusing on today, how to find more options for ourselves than we might currently have available to us. So, if you've been around this channel for a while, you know that I spent a lot of time healing from fearful avoidant attachment, which means that personally, I had attachment responses in different directions. So, I dealt with a lot of deactivation of the attachment system, which is more akin to avoidant spectrum types. But I also had certain triggers that would flip me into more anxious, preoccupied response patterns. And the kind of cool thing about getting to experience the whole range of attachment responses is that you start gaining some clarity as you go through the healing process on what it feels like physically to be trapped in each response pattern. And I started personally kind of thinking of it in terms of where my center of gravity was in a given moment. So when I'm in secure patterning, when I'm feeling that sense of I'm okay, you're okay, I feel pretty centered in my own body and my own experiences. I'm very aware of what's going on for me internally. And I'm also pretty aware of the people around me and of my loved ones and what's going on for them. So I'm able to both attune to myself and attune to other people and stay present with both things at the same time. When I would flip into a more avoidant or deactivated response, it felt like my center of gravity was located inside of my body. So I still felt like I was okay, but I almost needed to push everybody else and everything else out of my orbit in order to properly relax and connect to myself. I needed to be far away, either literally or emotionally, from other people in order to kind of let down. And then when I was in a more anxious, preoccupied response pattern, which is what we're going to be talking about today, I noticed that it felt like my center of gravity would actually become located inside of somebody else. So if I was fighting with a partner, or if I was really triggered in some way that involved another person, it would feel like the part of me that knows how to make me feel okay is inside of this other person, almost like a Horcrux. Like I have to find a way to regulate this other person enough to get them back in my good graces so that then they can give me the co-regulation I need to feel okay again. Because my route to co-regulation is located inside of them. And so what we're going to be talking about today is how to work with that response when it comes up. And specifically, how to recognize when it might be time to search for that co-regulation, which is a perfectly natural thing to want from a partner or other close loved ones, versus when we're kind of shooting ourselves and our relationships in the foot by desperately trying to get co-regulation out of someone who is just not able to give it to us in this moment. And in those moments, how we can start taking care of ourselves and increasing the options that are available to us for regulation in a way that actually serves the overall health of the relationship. So the first thing I want to go over here is what is actually happening for us when we find ourselves trapped in one of these response patterns, which is generally a very physiologically activated state. I find that the easiest way to think of this is sort of as an emotional flashback. So when we are children, we cannot meet our own needs. We need our parents both for our practical and physical needs to get met, but also for our regulation needs to get met. What it means to have an anxious attachment style is that generally, you had your emotional needs and your co-regulation needs met by your parents, but it was intermittent. So your body and your mind internalize this message that my parent will come and care for me if I can just make my distress clear enough to them. And so your entire nervous system wired around making your distress clearer and clearer in instances where you were feeling activated and not okay. And this is still the same response pattern that comes online in your nervous system as an adult when you're flipped into a preoccupied response. Some part of you is registering the situation the same way you did as a child, which is that you cannot get your own needs met. And so your only hope is to get this other person to pay attention to you and to help you regulate yourself. The problem, of course, is that this is no longer true in a technical sense. As an adult, you have lots of routes available to you for both fulfilling your resource needs and regulating yourself. But in those moments where your system is stuck in this old response pattern, it can't remember that you are whatever age you are. So I remember when I was reading the book No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz, which is a brilliant look at internal family systems therapy. One of the things he encouraged us to ask ourselves when we find that we have a part of ourselves coming online that is very distressed is ask that part, how old do you think I am? Which feels like kind of a funny question at first, right? But I found that when I started asking myself this question, when I was in an anxious, preoccupied response, and I was feeling obsessed with getting my partner or whoever else's attention, I would ask myself, how old do I feel right now? How old does some part of me think I actually am in this moment? And the answer was often pretty young. It was very rare in those moments that I was seeing myself as a competent and accomplished woman in her 20s or 30s. More often, I felt like a tiny child who was absolutely unable to fend for herself. And so the work that needs to get done here when we find ourselves in these responses is finding ways to remind ourselves of the age that we actually are. Because if we can remember the age that we actually are and really pull that into our bodies and remind ourselves that now we are adults who are not dependent on someone else for all of our needs, if we can actually embody the knowing of that, our system is going to relax. And it's going to allow us to deal with our partner or whoever it is we're in a conflict with, adult to adult, instead of child to parent, which is likely how the emotional flashback that's happening in our system is subconsciously categorizing the interaction. And that's a big problem because when we are children, we have the right to our parents' attention. We need it on a survival level. And so there are certain things we will allow ourselves to do as children to get their attention that if we bring into an adult relationship are likely to cause a lot more problems than they solve. For example, we might lie about our feelings in order to get back in the other person's good graces. So we might put aside something we're angry about or not okay with and go, you know what, right now, all I need is to get this other person's attention back on me. So I'm going to fawn. I'm going to tell them whatever I think it is they want to hear in order to get back in connection, because it's most important for me to get regulated. And so if I can just say whatever I think this person wants from me in order to get them to like me again, then at least my body will be able to calm down and return to regulation. And this is unfortunately how we end up abandoning ourselves over and over and over again inside of relationships. When we tell ourselves that being in our partner's good graces is more important than being true and authentic to what matters to us. This is where we end up in relationship dynamics that start to go sideways because we are not bringing enough of ourselves into the equation. Another way we might try to get our partner's attention that is not in integrity with ourselves is to try to make the issue that we want attention on a relationship issue. So instead of saying, hey, I'm really stressed out about this, saying something like, I think it's really important for a relationship for us to focus on this, when that might not be the most true thing. The most true thing might be that this is just important to you, but you're afraid to say that and be rejected. So if you can make it about the two of you rather than yourself, you're minimizing the chances of dealing with that rejection, but you're also minimizing the chances that you can actually allow what's important for you to get seen and acknowledged in your relationship. Another thing that it's natural to do in a parent-child dynamic, but that does not work as well in an adult-to-adult dynamic, is amplify our pain to the point where the other person has to realize I am a bad person if I do not care about someone who is in that much distress. And this is a subconscious, deeply ingrained program that's going to come online for us if we have those anxious preoccupation responses. It's going to feel really easy in the moment to, instead of presenting our pain at the level it actually exists at, and giving the other person the opportunity to meet us there or to choose not to, the body's natural response might be to crank the volume up on that pain and to exaggerate it until it feels like the other person has to notice it. And again, this feels justified when we're in an emotional flashback, because when we are children, we need our parents' attention. The problem is that as adults, nobody is required to give us their attention. People do have the choice to decide not to care about us, not to love us, not to attend to our pain, and to walk away from us in the moments when we need them. And the problem is that if we are willing to use all of these tactics to get them to stay in situations where they don't authentically want to be there, what we are doing is making a relationship that is wrong for us one that we are well adapted to. Doing all of these behaviors are not particularly vulnerable, even though they might feel vulnerable in the moment. The vulnerable thing to do in any relationship is to be honest and let the other person authentically choose whether they want to be with us or not, when we are just clean, clear, and direct about who we are and what matters to us. Trying to change ourselves to be more of what they want so that they stay on the page with us when we're distressed. Trying to make things about the relationship that are actually just about what we want. And turning the volume way up on our pain in the hopes that they will want to attend to it are all self-abandoning moves. In every one of these experiences, we have disconnected from the adult that lives inside of us, and we have failed to respect that person. And it is impossible to be in an adult-adult relationship if you are not showing up as and for your own inner adult. So that's what we're going to talk about next. When you find yourself in one of these response patterns, and you're in one of those emotional flashbacks where the child in you has taken over and is desperate to get this other person's attention no matter what, how do you instead find your inner adult, your inner parent who is able to care for that distressed child, who might be distressed for very normal reasons? It is very normal to feel distressed and sad and angry when you're in a conflict with someone you really love and don't want to lose. So it's not that that child is crazy or wrong. It's just that that child needs an adult to take care of them. And if your partner is triggered themselves, it's highly likely that they are not going to be available to do that parenting for you in this moment. So what you're going to need to do is find the skills to self-parent through those moments and return yourself to that adult state where you can handle both your own feelings, however raw and intense, and recognize that the person you're dealing with is another adult who is having their own experience of this conflict that is totally separate from yours, and that they probably need to use their own resources to attend to in the moment. So there is something that your system is getting right in these moments. What it's getting right is that you are in pain and you need help attending to that pain. You need a healthy adult to come help you self-regulate and figure out how to deal with what you are feeling and how to work through the panic that you're experiencing. What turns this into a secure pattern is when you find the adult in yourself who can do that in moments of distress. So instead of getting preoccupied with getting back in your partner's good graces so that you can have the care and attention you need, you have to start turning your attention to, how can I give myself the care and attention I need, even if they continue to be a giant asshole about this forever, and they might. And that is unfortunately their right as a fully grown adult. And this is so hard to grasp in the moment, but it does not mean that you are condoning the other person's behavior. It does not mean that you are allowing yourself to be mistreated with no consequence. What it means is that you are going to connect to the strongest possible version of yourself, who is going to be much more equipped to handle all of the disappointment you are feeling about the relationship dynamic when the time is right. So I'll give you an example of this. There's a time when I had gone to a workshop on trauma that was out of town. It was a couple of hours by train from where I was living. And when I went to this workshop, I was there for about 3 days. It was supposed to be 5. But on the third day, I got really triggered in a way that I was really struggling to kind of self regulate around. And so on the fourth day, I decided I'm going to go home a day early because my whole system was just screaming, get away from this trigger. And so I got on the train to go back home. And I called my then partner and I said, hey, I'm going to be home a day early. Would you want to hang out tonight? And my partner went, sure, sounds great. And so sitting there on the train, I wasn't really attending to my own feelings of being triggered. What I was thinking about was how nice it was going to be to see my partner again. And in my head, my partner was starting to look less the way they usually looked in my mind, and more like a hero who was going to be able to soothe all of my pain around this. And this was all happening totally subconsciously, right? I wasn't choosing any of this. But I was kind of triangulating this workshop I had been at, which I decided was corrupt and put together badly, and my partner, who would, of course, understand everything that should have happened at the workshop and soothe me around how bad it was. The problem is that 10 minutes before I pulled into the train station, I got a text from my partner saying, I can't pick you up. I'm having a situation with my roommate. It's a long story, but I really need to take a nap. I'll call you when I wake up. And I just felt this rage in my system. Like, how dare you abandon me in this moment when I'm feeling so dysregulated? And I remember almost seeing my options branching out before me. One of them, which my very activated system wanted to take, was to just shame and blame my partner for being a terrible partner. How dare you blow me off like this via text? Why didn't you let me know this half an hour ago? I'm having a crappy day and you don't seem to care, right? All of these emotions that were in my system naturally wanted to just turn up the dial and get my partner to pay attention to me again and apologize for not coming to the train station and come pick me up and shower me with love and affection because I was really struggling to regulate myself. But again, luckily, I was at the point in my attachment work where I was also able to see other options. So I asked myself, if I did not have a partner, if I were completely single, if there wasn't even a chance to go to this person for regulation, what would I do to take care of myself? And I really thought about it and sunk into that possibility. And I went, well, I'd probably go home. I would take a bath. I would call a friend, potentially. I would do some writing. I would have a really long sleep. And then in the morning, I would go take myself out for a nice coffee at a cafe. And all of these other options started coming online for me of things that I could do to regulate myself. And only once I was able to see those options could I go back to the conversation with my partner and be fully honest with them. So I sent my partner a text message letting them know I'm feeling really dysregulated from the retreat, and I didn't make that clear before. And I hear that you're also struggling with something with your roommate and you're feeling a little off. And what I don't want to happen is for me to come over and to be in this state of anger and resentment towards you, which is currently what I'm feeling. So I'm wondering if it makes sense for us to stay in our own places tonight and try meeting up tomorrow instead. And then, because the relationship that I was in was luckily pretty secure, I got an immediate call from my partner, and we just kind of talked out what capacity levels we were both at and what our best solution was going to be for the night. But if I had gone with that anxious gut impulse to turn the volume way up on my pain and become critical about my partner's response, rather than open about what was happening for me and what my feelings were in an adult-to-adult way, I would have been putting them into the parent position and myself into the child position and started some form of rift between us. Because from this position, it's impossible for them to actually see me as I am, which is an adult human being, not a child. And it's impossible from that position for me to see them as they are, which is an adult human being with their own needs and capacities and triggers, not a parent who's responsible for regulating me in every moment. And the reason this is really important to keep in mind is because it's not that we want to simply let disappointments or letdowns slide in relationships. We do want to be talking about the things we're struggling with. We do want to be bringing issues up and finding common ground on the areas that we feel hurt by. But when we react from our emotional flashbacks, what we are doing is lashing out at our partners for not being perfect parents, when that is not what they are. When we deal with these issues, we want to be dealing with them partner to partner. And once again, that requires us getting into our adult selves. So, how do we do that? What we want to get clear on so that we can draw on it in the moment we find ourselves in these triggers is what makes us feel like the most competent, the most capable, and the most strong versions of ourselves at the age that we are actually at. So there are lots of things that children cannot do. And in those moments when we are in an emotional flashback and we're feeling regressed, it can actually be very helpful to do things that physically we were not capable of as children. So for myself, if I'm feeling like I'm stuck in an emotional flashback, the first question I ask myself is what could a 7-year-old, if the age that I'm feeling is 7 years old, not possibly do? I sat down one day and made a whole list of those things while I was feeling regulated. And then when I was dysregulated into an anxious response, I would start drawing from that list. A child could not do my job. So as silly as it sounds, sometimes if I'm feeling really triggered, I will go do some very adult, very mundane task like answering emails or doing the accounting for my business or getting my taxes organized, something that objectively a child just could not do. It is actually very helpful for me to go engage with for a little bit if I'm in an emotional flashback. It proves to me that I am not 7. I'm a woman in my mid-30s, and I am capable of taking care of myself practically. Other examples of this could be going grocery shopping and cooking a meal for myself. These are things I did not know how to do when I was a child, especially if it's kind of like a grown-up meal, Like no mac and cheese here. We're talking something that it requires adult cognition to engage with. Another simple one for me is going shopping. So taking that running list of things that need to get done in my notes section and just getting through as many of those errands as possible. Or going and buying myself something nice to wear. As a kid, I was always frustrated that I couldn't buy my own clothes. And so this became a very clear sign when I was an adult that I was an adult. I could now buy my own clothes. Another good one can be calling a friend or calling a loved one and not talking about the relationship conflict. Because, while it's totally fine and great practice to be able to co-regulate with other people, if the goal is getting reconnected to our adult selves, we don't want to be bringing that child state into the conversation in the moment. So calling someone who you are doing a project with and just updating them on your half of the project, or calling a friend and scheduling a coffee date later that week, all of these things can be ways of reminding ourselves, this person, my partner, or whoever it is I'm upset with, is not my only connection to resource. I am now a fully grown adult who can do things like earn money, go shopping, take care of myself, make plans with friends and loved ones, without having to go through this person. The way that as a child, you always had to go through your parent to get your needs met. So this is about finding the competent adult inside of yourself that you are so desperate to find in your partner and handing your pain over to them. And only then are we going to be able to re-engage with our partners in a way that is actually fair. Because again, to be in a secure adult relationship means to recognize that sometimes you're really going to want something from your partner and they are just not going to have the capacity in that moment to give it to you. It means to recognize that people are fallible and they don't always show up perfectly. We also don't always show up perfectly, and there needs to be forgiveness for that from an adult to adult place. So when we can connect to that part of ourselves, we are ironically giving our relationships the best chance at resolving the rifts that come up inside of them effectively, because the adult inside of us is appealing to the adult inside of them, which is the only level at which secure adult relationships can function. Here's the last thing I'll say here. If it feels like an act of self-abandonment to take care of yourself in all of these moments because your partner is perpetually unwilling to show up for you when you tell them about your pain at the level it actually exists at, a secure person is eventually going to take that as a clue that they might be in the wrong relationship. But again, it takes being centered in that adult self to be able to recognize that and to be able to make clear and self-protective decisions about the relationships you're in. When we get stuck in seeing our partner as the only possible route to getting regulated when we're distressed, it really limits our options because we're no longer able to be clear-headed about how they are behaving. When we have different options available to us, That is what it means to be secure. To be secure means I know how to go to people for co-regulation and support, but also I have other options available to me for how I can regulate myself in the instances where the person I want that regulation from is not able to give it to me. So I have a wide arsenal of things I can go to and strategies I can try. And this is precisely why secure people are a lot better than those who are more anxious at leaving relationships where their needs are not getting met. Because instead of doing whatever they can think of to force their partner to regulate with them when they're feeling distressed, they choose whatever the best possible option is. And they start to recognize over time, if 90% of the time I'm doing self-regulation, and only 10% of the time my partner is available to meet me in the moment when I need them and co-regulate with me through difficult moments, that's probably just not the most supportive partnership. And I might want to go find someone who's more secure like myself. But again, they're able to see their partner's limitations as not a moral insult or injury, but just as information about where they're both at and what their differing needs are. All right, I think I'm going to leave it at that for today. But in summary, I just want to encourage us to start thinking about these really intense moments as moments where we have the opportunity to expand our arsenal of skills. So as painful as they are and as challenging as they are, they're also chances for us to start showing up differently and giving ourselves the respect that we need and are so desperate to find inside of other people. And this is the exact skill that gets us moving on that route towards secure attachment. All right, as always, any thoughts, any comments, any questions that you guys had coming up as you were going through this video, please leave them in the comment section below. I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you back here again really soon.